Today, we are going to tell a story, a true story, a story that happened here in New York, a story about a man very involved in his church, the pastor of his church, a man very involved in his community, a man heavily involved in politics, conservative politics, a vice chairman of the Conservative Party of the state of New York, a man of faith, a husband, a father, and a leader in the pro-life movement. A man who, from all aspects, is the perfect citizen, but a man who ended up in jail. He ended up in jail because he could not afford to fight the system. It cost him a great deal. It cost him his home. It cost him a bankruptcy. It cost him to legally fight back. The journey took over 3 years. The crime he allegedly committed involved approximately $1,283, and it wasn't a crime at all. It was a simple miscalculation of numbers on a report he had filed numerous times over the course of decades with no complaints, no mistakes. He was a truthful man. This is a man who would never lie, a man who would never cheat, a pillar in his community, a leader in his church, a leader in his faith, a leader in conservative politics. This is the story of our Attorney General LETITIA James, a woman intent on using her power for political gain, an Attorney General intent on prosecuting those she did not politically agree with, an Attorney General who had the strength of New York State behind every investigation, an Attorney General willing to bend the law to fit her purpose. This is an Attorney General who won election by telling constituents that she would prosecute Donald Trump for crimes he really didn't commit. This is the story of Jason McGuire. Jason, welcome to the show.
Ralph, it's good to be with you on this snowy Saturday morning.
So, Jason, first of all, I want our audience to know who you are. Now, I've known you for quite some time, and all those things I've just said I know are so true. I know the character of who you are, but I want our audience to know the background. So, tell us, you went to theology school. Tell us some of your background.
Yeah, so I actually grew up in your neck of the woods. I was born down Lapeer Street in Buffalo. I lived in a lot of the suburbs of that region. I went to a Bible college in the Binghamton area and trained to be a pastor, where I served as a pastor of a church in the Finger Lakes region for 12 years before coming to an organization known as New York Families. And New York Families is an advocacy organization. We represent the pro-life and pro-family perspective at the New York State Legislature with a congressional delegation in Washington, D.C. So we hold traditional Christian values when it comes to life and marriage, parental rights, and those types of things that oftentimes finds us at odds with the government here in New York State.
So how did you get involved in conservative politics?
I was actually working on these issues in the legislature regarding marriage and life, and I had just gotten pretty frustrated with where both political parties were in some of those things and how they were capitulating to the left on these issues. And so I had called up the former state chairman, Mike Long, and I just said, Chairman, is there a place for me in the Conservative Party if I come over? And he said there sure was, to come on over, and we organized a county. I got involved at that level. I did that for about a dozen years, and been with the Conservative Party ever since. And so he really got me plugged in and has helped me to see just the advantages of being able to move in a party that is nimble and that can respond to those conservative values that you and I both care about.
A party that is a pro-life party. We're the only party that has that as one of our planks. We're a pro-life party. I mean, there are so many traditional issues that we hold dear that, in my opinion, we're able to keep the Republican Party to those issues. We're able to put forth those issues to the public, and those are issues that, in my opinion, obviously in yours, the public wants and needs. We need more of. But you've been, again, a strong leader. You were the chairman of a county for the Conservative Party. But tell us about New York Families, your role there. I know that you played an extremely strong role there.
Yeah, so I'm the executive director of the organization. I've been doing it for almost 20 years now. And at New York Families, we equip and we empower New Yorkers of faith, usually evangelicals, though a number of Catholic individuals come alongside our organization as well. And we equip and empower them for effective participation in government. So we want to see believers, followers of the gospel, getting engaged with their government because we believe and we live in a representative form of government. And if we're not going to get involved and be a part of that, well, then other people who don't share our values will win the day, and those public policies will become the policies of New York State. So if you're pro-life, you're pro-family, you support parental rights, you're about religious liberty, we really want to be the organization that represents those values in our state capital.
So pro-life, let's spend a little bit of time talking about that. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of abortions in New York State. I mean, it's used as contraception. I've read that in the minority community in New York City, there are more abortions than there are live births. I mean, that's just absolutely terrible. Where do you see us in that battle?
Yeah, I think New York is going to be one of those states, maybe the last to come to the realization that life does begin at the moment of conception. I think we'll be one of the last states to recognize that that unborn child ought to be protected legally. But beyond that, we may be one of the last states to recognize that abortion is to not only be an illegal activity, but an unthinkable activity, because law alone will not be enough. We're going to have to change hearts and minds. You're seeing this kind of divide that's going on across the nation today, and you see some states that are generally more red, but they're more pro-life states that are taking action to protect, women and their unborn babies. And then you see states like New York that just for no other reason than just ideology, they are just running to everything they can to protect the so-called right to an abortion. That's where we are in New York, and I think it's important that people realize that if they want to see that process change, they've got to engage in it. I mean, you have a Democratic Party here in New York, and you alluded to the fact as to how many of those abortions come out of the minority communities. And here you have this Democratic Party who's supposed to be the champion of the minority community, and yet they're seeing this really attack on those unborn members. It ought not to be that way, and yet that is the situation here in New York. I mean, think about just the taxpayer funding of what happens with abortion in New York. About half of abortions today are paid for under Medicaid dollars. I sure don't want my taxpayer dollars paying for that, but that's the state of where we are in New York. I want to work towards a state where one day we can call ourselves a pro-life state.
There was a time when Democrats voted against Medicaid funding for abortion. There was that time. We had local Democrats who actually would vote against it, but now we're controlled by downstate. We're controlled by the ultra-liberal, the ultra-left. It's, in my now 52 years of practicing law, I can honestly say the best thing I ever did, and I did it only a few times, maybe I think 4, is in private placement adoptions. I was able to take that child from the mother that gave the child up and hand that baby to adoptive parents. Oh my God, the joy in those people's, face when I brought them the child. They had gone through the process. We need to educate people. To me, it's a strong moral issue. We need to put money behind adoptions. We need to fund more education in terms of the alternative. We clearly need to do those things, and late-term abortion is clearly... we all used to be against it. I still think most people are against it, but they need to be informed and they need to know what's important, and certainly newborn children are.
Yeah, in your neck of the state, you still have many of those what we used to call blue dog Democrats, or you'd have socially conservative Democrats. Right. In Albany, we refer to the Stokowski Democrats. Former state senator Bill Stokowski,
yes,
right, had some conservative positions, and I still think that is the really in the hem of the garment of your region of the state are those people that still hold those values. It's just gotten so politicized today that people run to various camps, and they think they have to hold every position of that party to be able to to show themselves a good member of that position. It's just become very politicized today, and I think you see a little more of the breakdown that we would have seen a couple of decades ago.
So beyond pro-life, we now have passed a law with physician-assisted suicide. Tell us what your position is there.
Yeah, so really for over 10 years now, our organization has been leading a fight against assisted suicide here in the Empire State. And, it's been a challenge because, again, we live in this day today to where I think we are moving away from a biblical or a Christian worldview, and it is impacting how people view so many of these so-called social issues. But you don't have to be a Christian or of any particular religious faith to oppose assisted suicide. We've been standing alongside disability rights advocates who fear that if assisted suicide becomes the law, as it is now going to be here in New York State, they fear for their lives. Because every time they go into a doctor's appointment, every time they have to go in for a medical meeting, they have to advocate strongly for their position. Many times medical personnel do not see the quality of life for our disabled friends that they see for themselves. They want to live. I'm concerned about a day in which we now go to meet with doctors and medical personnel, and those people will now see assisted suicide as one of these so-called treatment options. That's not an appropriate position for medicine to do no harm to take. And yet here we are as a state as we're going down the road of personal autonomy at the risk of upending medicine as a whole.
So, Canada is the perfect example of how these things start and then where they go. So right now, the argument will be there are a lot of protections built into the New York State law for physician-assisted suicide. You need doctors. You need 2 doctors to be able to say that you're psychologically understand the issue and accept the issue. You need to be in a situation where your life is not going to, you're in danger of dying. But that's how it started in Canada, and it has moved substantially. I am just so worried about the slippery slope. And then there's the insurance companies. It is obviously a whole lot cheaper to give you some pills so that you end your life than it is to give you an operation that today costs maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Yeah, that's right. And as we were fighting this issue, we'd often hear that from legislators, the very thing that you just alluded to. They would say the strongest argument against assisted suicide is Canada, our neighbor to the north, to see how it's being used there and how it's being utilized. And you have cases now of people that aren't physically terminally ill, but they're depressed, that are now coming to where they can receive assisted suicide in that place. You have large numbers of the population that are just choosing assisted suicide as a quote-unquote easy way out at the end of life. And we did see the governor put in some suggestions, things she wanted before she would sign the bill. She's now signed that bill. But in reality, amending assisted suicide does not fix a fundamentally flawed policy. And at its core, you cannot make assisted suicide legislation a good bill. It always takes that road that is less costly for the insurance company. It takes the road that maybe if an individual feels like they're being a burden to their family, to where they will take an easy exit rather than fighting through what admittedly can be some difficult suffering at the end of life.
And unfortunately, what statistics show us is that most people that choose assisted suicide are not choosing it because of pain or suffering. They're choosing it because they feel they are a burden to those around them. We're here speaking with Jason McGuire, and I want you to get to know Jason McGuire because I've gotten to know him over the course of several years. The dedication that this man has to his community, the dedication he has to traditional values, the values that we all hold dear. Look, if you have a question for Jason or a question for any of us, you can contact us at the station. The phone number to call is 716-500-1270. So 716-500-1270 if you have a question for me or a question for Jason. So, Jason, let's get into this terrible ordeal that you've had to suffer through. So, first of all, when did it all start?
Yeah, so essentially back in 2018, there was a political opponent who had filed a baseless charge against me over some positions I was taking. But that didn't do anything. The Office of Public Integrity looked at it and said there's nothing there. They let it lie dormant. There was no, never went any further. But that letter was then picked up in 2021 by the Attorney General's
3 years later.
3 years later, to open up a very broad investigation into my life, both personally and professionally. Essentially, my organization, Christian school where I served as chairman of the board, my mechanic was subpoenaed. I mean, you name it. If I was connected to something, they began to subpoena and investigate everything in my life. We went through 8 different rounds of subpoenas, producing over 7,000 pages of documents. Those legal fees have now exceeded over $150,000. We think the organization is out almost $500,000 as a result of what's been going on. And all along the path, we were never given any charges. They just used these grand jury subpoenas as means to dig and to fish, to try to find something, anything they could get to try to punish me for some of the positions I had taken.
Because you're a leader in your community, you're a leader in a position that's opposite to the position of Letitia James.
Yeah, I mean, we had even found ourselves, opposing her legally in courts. I mean, there was a situation with the Second Amendment situation where churches were told they could not have their armed security details
Correct.
in their churches.
Correct.
Well, we opposed that, and as a matter of fact, we were going to court over that. The Attorney General did not appreciate that position. We had then there was a situation where some information had been leaked out of her office regarding Nikki Haley's donor records some years ago. We're going to court to challenge her in that regard because we didn't want our donors disclosed by being leaked out of her office. She didn't like that either. And, as a result, they really came back after my donors and tried to get lists of my donors that we simply refused to turn over.
So, again, it starts in 2018 with a letter that gets set aside. There's no real action here. There's nothing really to look at. 3 years later, Letitia James, after you are on the opposite, obviously, political spectrum of hers, 3 years later, she picks it up and starts an investigation. An investigation without specific charges. An investigation with judicial subpoenas that require 7,000 pages of documents?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, and it never ended, and so we would... it's debilitating. I guess that's what I don't think people really realize is when the power and the weight of government comes against you. And we don't use that term lawfare loosely. It's real. There was no charge here. There was nothing specific they were looking for. They just wanted anything. They had identified the individual, myself, that they wanted to target, and then they began to tear into every aspect of my life trying to find something. That's a textbook definition of lawfare. Identify the person first, then try to find the crime. It ought to work the opposite in our legal system. If there's a crime, go investigate. That's not what happened here. They found the individual that they politically disagreed with, and then they sought to destroy me in the process.
So this is something we all have to be aware of, that, look, this is a woman who we know ran on the mantra that she was going to charge Donald Trump with some type of crime, and she eventually did and spent a great deal of New York State's money doing it. But here, again, to a different extent, you are a leader in your community. You are a leader in these different groups. You are in total opposition to a number of positions that are held by Letitia James or the far left. So you're vocal about it. You're vocal about it, and you're doing something. And so you become the target.
Yeah, President Donald Trump once said, "They're not coming after me, they're coming after you. I'm just in the way."
That's right.
And I think that's what we're experiencing here. And people will sometimes look at my case and say, "Why you?" We're just the voice of opposition. And, the far left, the progressive movement, cannot take any opposition to their position. And that's been personified now through Letitia James and what she's been doing. But I'm not the only one. There are 11 pro-life pregnancy centers that are also being investigated by the Attorney General's office. Why the pro-life pregnancy centers? Why not the Planned Parenthoods? Why not all these other things? In 2021, there were almost 4,000 campaign finance violations in New York. None were prosecuted or were investigated or prosecuted to our knowledge, except one.
Yours.
That involved me. Yeah.
So
and so it just becomes very selective enforcement.
Those subpoenas, what were they looking for? What did they ask you for?
In those subpoenas, they were looking for everything, but probably some of the most egregious things were copies of sermons I had preached.
Incredible.
They wanted incredible. Oh yeah, clear First Amendment violation. We refused to turn them over, not because I didn't. I was ashamed of anything we said, and they're afraid of anything we said. I just don't believe it's the role of government to censor what comes out of the pulpit. They demanded lists of attendees at events that I held, lists of donors to my organization, which again are First Amendment violations. People have the right to assemble. They have the right to their free speech. They have the right to donate to organizations they believe in without having the harassment of government coming after them. Those were the types of things. But to get more minute and to show how petty some of this was, if I had a car repaired at my local mechanic shop, my mechanic got subpoenaed for the records regarding repairs to personal and to company vehicles through his garage. It just shows how petty some of this was becoming, so that person had to hire attorneys to represent them. That shouldn't be a burden to my mechanic or to a Christian school where I served on the board. They shouldn't have to hire attorneys just to do their work. But there was a process of trying to crush us and to crush people around me and discourage donors from continuing to support our work.
Jason, this is Russ Gugino. It's great to see you and talk to you about your situation. But when we were at the Conservative Conference this past weekend in Albany, your story was put into a film, and that film, I believe, is available on YouTube. So why don't you give our listeners some information as to how they can get to that YouTube film and see the whole story in that project.
Yeah, thanks, Russ. I appreciate that. You know, we decided very early on in this process that we were going to do what we could to fight this legally, and we did. But ultimately, it led to my being pleading to 2 misdemeanors rather than having another 2 trials that would have cost another $250,000. And that led to 53 days of intermittent incarceration, weekend jail in the Livingston County Jail. And after having served that time, we said we have to hold government accountable for what it's done. And so we decided that the best way to do that was to tell our story through a documentary. So we've put a short documentary. It's 23 minutes, and it's entitled Inmate 090198, the number I was assigned and I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I didn't know it at the time, but if I should, for some reason, find myself back in that jail, my number will remain Inmate 090198. That documentary is available a couple of ways. You can find it through going to justiceforjason.org, where you can sign a petition asking the Department of Justice to take a look at my case and to intervene. Then we'll send you a link to where you can view that. You can also find it on our website at newyorkfamilies.org, newyorkfamilies.org/lawfare, or you can simply go to our YouTube channel. We're youtube.com, look up New York Families, New York spelled out, families is plural, and you just find that documentary, Inmate 090198.
I certainly want to talk about how we can help you as we get through this conversation, but I want to go back to how the strength of government, how overwhelming that is and can be, and how when it's brought against an individual, the cost of defense, the cost that you suffer not only in monetary means, but in emotional, your friendships, the people around you have to suffer. I want people to understand how wrong it is for government to come after someone, as you said, because they're coming after the person first, and then they're going to find a violation second. So tell us what you went through these years of being prosecuted.
Yeah, one of the most difficult things I think I found early on, aside from all of the massive amount of work and trying to go through old records and pulling all this documentation and stuff together, it moves your focus away from your main work, because now you become full-time trying to fend off the attacks of government.
And you have to produce those documents, otherwise you're in violation of different laws.
Exactly right. So you have to do it. And like I said, 7,000 pages is no small task to document and submit and all of those things. But one of the hardest parts was you never know who knew or who was being subpoenaed. And, people generally don't talk about that because if you get a subpoena, it asks you to be kindly request that you be quiet about it. And so you have friends, you have people you work with, you have other organizations you're allied with, and you just never know who's being subpoenaed or what's going on. And then there's this, kind of shadow of doubt that is planted in people's minds as to what's going on. That then, in turn, causes donors to pull back from financially supporting the work, who've been with us for many years. But when they start getting subpoenas because they've been given to our work and they start to wonder what's going on, it has a chilling effect on the work that we're involved in. And frankly, that's a chilling effect on free speech. And so that has just a tremendous impact on the work that we were able to do in Albany with our congressional delegation.
And you have a wife and 4 children. How were they affected?
Yeah, it's funny. When my kids were little and they would see Dad's name in the newspapers or on the web or whatever it might be, it was a little easier to shield them from that kind of stuff. But now that they're young adults, they're in their 20s, my kids were getting links to news articles about my case before I even knew they printed. Their friends were sending them news when they were out of state through text and things, and then I would get the text from my kids. So we had to talk through that, work through that, and we're still doing that. It's not just me that bears that burden, but it's the whole family that carries that, because every time a news article pops or something happens, your kids are a part of that. It's a part of a family that gets impacted by that. And that's the part we really haven't brought out yet is, yes, I pled to 2 misdemeanors that otherwise would have been just a simple amendment to a campaign finance report. Under any normal prosecutor, it wouldn't have been a big deal. You just move on. There's no crime here. But this wasn't a reasonable prosecution. So when I pled to 2 misdemeanors, the Attorney General's office put out a hit piece, a press release on me accusing me of things I never pled to that simply were not true. And we believe that they had endeavored to, when they realized they could not get me legally, they sought to destroy my reputation statewide. And so there were newspapers, not only in Buffalo, but in Long Island and everywhere in between, that were carrying just defamatory headlines about accusing me of things that never happened that will follow me for the rest of my life. If you Google my name, you will still see those false charges.
So I want to get into a little bit about that. It was $1,283.76 in dollars and cents that was entered wrongly on a form. Is that what the case was?
Yeah, there was 2 different campaign finance reports, so 3 transactions and 2 reports. After going through millions of dollars in investigations, different transactions come through my organization. After going through probably tens of thousands, if not 100,000 digital transactions.
Yeah, you've been doing this for decades.
Up with 3. Oh, yeah. Yeah, this went back, they were really looking at 7 years worth of information here.
Yeah.
And after all of that, all they could find was not one dime of missing money. They found 3 misrecorded transactions, which if you've ever worked with the state's campaign finance report system, it's very antiquated.
Yes.
And it's very easy to make those mistakes. And so
I've seen it repeatedly in numerous candidates. But it's always correctable.
Right. You simply amended. The Board of Elections had no concern with my reports. That wasn't where this problem came from. It was out of the Attorney General's office. If we could have just amended those reports, and we'd said that from the beginning, if there is an error, because there will always be human error and human endeavor, if there's an error, let's correct it and move on. We kind of thought at some point maybe there'll be some slap on the wrist from Board of Elections. We knew somebody had to get their pound of flesh if they were going to investigate, but never did we dream it would come to the level that it did. But again, we were not dealing with a reasonable prosecutor. We were dealing with LETITIA James Lawfare.
So what did it cost you personally?
Yeah, personally through this process, we lost our home. We found ourselves in bankruptcy. I'm 50 years old. I feel like I'm starting all over again.
That is so devastating. I mean, you were a guy who worked hard, built an organization, was a leader of New York families, raising 4 children, and now you lose your home and you have to file bankruptcy because of LETITIA James, her different political views.
Yeah. And I remind people I had an organization behind me. I had a strong board that supported me. We had some financial support from the organization. It's not unlimited, and the power of government is crushing. If I did not have that organization behind me, if I did not have that network, if I did not have that support, If I were just another New Yorker that didn't have that, you can imagine how crushing that would be.
We're here talking with Jason McGuire, a story that is heart-wrenching, a story of how the strength of government wanting to get the person and fitting a crime to the person, how devastating that can be. So, Jason, again, you went through a number of years of this type of persecution, and then you finally decided you had to take a plea. Tell us about that decision.
Yeah, so in December of 2024, I instructed my attorneys to go back to the Attorney General's office and say, look, we've been doing this for 3 years. You've never produced any charges. It just keeps costing us more and more and more. If you have something, bring charges. If you don't, we're done. At that meeting, the Attorney General's office told my attorney, well, if that's how Mr. McGuire feels about it, then Mrs. McGuire better lawyer up too, because she is now the subject or the target of our investigation. We believe that was an attempt to pressure us into accepting felony charges. No
question. That is how they do put pressure on people. They go after your family. So now they're going to go after your wife. My God.
Right. Yeah, and we stuck to our guns even after that. I mean, I did have to hire a separate attorney for my wife. She had to have her own lawyer to represent her interests. And so now we're hiring another attorney and more additional fees. But about a month later, the Attorney General's office called us back in January 2025, spoke with my attorney, and said, look, would your client be willing to accept 2 misdemeanors? And again, this is for those 2 or 3 campaign finance recordings on 2 different reports. And they structured this so that there'd be 2 different criminal trials. They would put one in Monroe County, which is my county of residence, and then one in Albany County. And so by having 2 trials, they were going to take 2 cracks at it. And my lawyer said, look, that's going to cost another $250,000 to fight those 2 trials.
Yep.
What do you want to do? At that point, my board and I talked about it. We prayed about it. We looked at each other. We said, look, we just cannot spend donor dollars on these ridiculous charges. And they're misdemeanors. We thought we'd get, conditional discharge would be no big deal, and we'd be done with it. And
yeah,
so
you had
agreed to accept.
Obviously, you had no criminal record whatsoever. So yeah, you would figure that at the very worst, they're misdemeanors. They give you a conditional discharge.
Yeah, and the pre-sentencing report, even there was no call for restitution. There was no demand for probation. The judge even looked at it. He said, "Look, you've got a solid family. You got work. You're not a drug addict. There's no reason to give you probation." And so there was none of those things. But nonetheless, that ended up in a sentencing of 53 days of intermittent incarceration or weekend jail that I served at the Livingston County Jail. But that wasn't the worst part of it. And I alluded to this earlier. The worst part was how they attempted to smear my name by putting out this hit piece that went statewide, accusing me of stealing funds and all sorts of things that simply were not true, that were not what I pled to, and the charges were not even related to.
So in spite of the plea that you pled to, they went out on the day that you pled and put out a press release.
Ralph, I was still sitting in the courtroom when reporters started texting me. My phone had been turned off while in court. I didn't even know it. Reporters were texting me. They were sending me, direct messages through X and other things, asking for comment on the press release of the Attorney General's office. I had no idea until I walked out of the courtroom how they had set me up to take that kind of a hit.
So even though this was about $1,283.76, they in their press release say you stole $16,000.
Exactly. To which we still, to this day, have no idea where they came up with that figure.
Which
they accuse us of using things like for beauty treatments, which we later could only figure were haircuts. If I go in and get a haircut, they called that a beauty treatment, that kind of thing. And that was on my personal account, but they had been monitoring and subpoenaing my account. So if I got reimbursed for an expense from the organization and then I used those funds to buy a pair of socks, they'd say it was clothing. Or if I used to pay for a haircut, they'd say it was used for beauty treatments, just to make things look worse in the media.
If it was $16,000 really, that would be felonies, not misdemeanors. I mean, they're just embellishing for their own benefit.
Yeah, and it causes me to question now every time I see something come out of the office of the Attorney General, I see a press release or I see some announcement, I wonder how true it really is, or is someone else having happened to them what happened to me? if you expect people to come and to deal in good faith and to seek true justice through the Attorney General's office, they have to be partners in that good faith. But they're not. They're engaged in the politics of personal destruction, and we see injustice coming out of what should be justice in this Attorney General's office.
So now you're sentenced to an intermittent sentence of 56 days for weekends, which means every Friday afternoon you have to appear at the jail, and you're in jail from Friday afternoon, I take it, till Sunday evening.
Monday morning. But yes.
Monday morning, wow.
Yeah, it was a new experience for me. I've never been incarcerated before, a bit claustrophobic, so that was dealing with some of that. It's just I'd never been through that before, and I still to this day can't believe that the first time this happens, they're sentencing me to jail for these misrecorded transactions.
So tell my audience, when you went to jail, what did you find there? Who was there waiting to pray with you?
Yeah, so the first weekend I arrived, my board was there, and so some of them called in by phone, some were in person, and just wanted to pray with me and encourage me as I went in. My board was wonderful. They knew what was going on. They stuck with me and continue to be with me through all of this. But what started that first week was just my board gathering. It began to grow week after week, just very organically, very naturally. People would come out to show and to stand in solidarity with me as to what I was going through. And so each week it would grow to where, and you'll see this in the documentary, Inmate 090198, you will see that there's like 100 people gathering outside that jail just at 5 o'clock on a Friday night just to come and pray with me and sing songs of worship and encouragement and just to let me know that I was not alone in that. It actually became a little disconcerting to the jail because they're not used to people gathering outside like that. And from a law enforcement perspective, I can see why they didn't, like that. But it was really just a bunch of people who were just
praying.
Average New Yorkers, just very concerned, praying, and wanting to do something to show support.
Jason, Russ again. Some people might say that this is LETITIA James just being a overly aggressive prosecutor, but others might say it is downright evil. What's your position on that?
I think any time you see government weaponized like this, it is an act of evil. They have unlimited resources. They are targeting people specifically, going after them, trying to crush them. Injustice is evil, but maybe that word evil is understood in a stronger way. But I find that people that are desperate for power, looking to grow their power, they have this insatiable appetite to crush opposition. That ought to be a concern for us as New Yorkers. I do not know why this woman continues to have the office that she does. She is not qualified for this office. She ought not to hold this office. She has demonstrated through her actions that she ought not to be able to serve as Attorney General, and from where I'm concerned, should lose her law license. And yet here she is as the Attorney General, and really has just been renominated as, to be the Attorney General by her own party without even a primary challenge. That's a problem if we cannot call out the evil that is coming from within that Democratic Party.
And this is a woman who herself has been accused of various violations, accused of lying on forms, accused of falsifying documents, saying a 5-family property that she had was a 4-family because she got funds for that, accused of claiming her father was her husband to get more beneficial treatment and mortgage interest rates. She's been accused of all those things, and the state, in their wisdom, put up millions of dollars for her defense.
And at the same time, we'll simply cry lawfare, weaponization of government, and think that it all goes away. When in reality, she is the very one that is engaged in lawfare and the weaponization of government.
Well, she's certainly somebody that we hope to defeat this year. I absolutely feel that as bad as Kathy Hochul has been as the governor of the state of New York, LETITIA James has been worse in terms of how she's handled the Attorney General's office, in terms of how she's weaponized that office. I want to get back to you and what happened to you. So you had to spend those weekends in jail. That must have been horrendous for a person of your faith, for a person that's led the life that you lead, to be there in jail when you know you've done nothing wrong, you know your life has been a life with Christ. I got to imagine how terrible that was.
The first weekend I showed up at jail, I am going through the booking process to where you have to, strip down and have the search and turn in all your clothes and wear whatever the jail gives you. And, you take no physical possessions in with you. And so I get to the desk and I am just about to surrender those items. And, the sheriff's deputy behind the desk looks at me and says, well, what are you doing here? What are these charges? She goes, I don't know what they are. I had to look them up to even see what they are. You don't belong here. Meaning this isn't the kind of thing that we see come through the jail. Why are you even here? And that was a good indication to me that even those that are engaged in law enforcement recognize how ridiculous these charges really were. It's a humiliating process to have to, surrender all of that, go through the strip searches. To, endure the isolation. I was not ready for the fact that when I went into jail, I'd be in a 9x9 cell in complete isolation for the first 4 days I was there. I now know it's because there was various testing and things that had to be done before I was allowed in general population, but no one prepares you for that. I turned to put my bedding down in the bunk when I first entered the cell, and I heard the door clink behind me. That was the last time it opened for the next 4 days.
Wow.
It wasn't Alcatraz, but it sure wasn't an experience that I want to repeat either.
Jason, could you give our listeners that information as to how they can learn more about your story and where they can contact you so they might be able to express their support for you?
Yeah, the best way to do it is to visit our website at newyorkfamilies.org. That's New York is spelled out, families is plural, newyorkfamilies.org. Also, there's a website out there at justiceforjason.org, and if people want to go there, they can sign a petition to the Department of Justice, where we're asking the federal government to look at how Letitia James is abusing her office here, in my case, in New York, and hopefully get some action out of the federal government as well. We hope the Trump administration will engage. That's at justiceforjason.org.
Jason, I looked up to see if you had a GoFundMe page or something that would help your family, and I couldn't find one. Is there something where someone could make a donation to help you?
Yeah, we just have a donate page set up on our website, and if folks in the memo section want to note what that is for, we'll honor that, we'll recognize that. Oftentimes people are just saying, hey, for legal expenses, because it has been a hit to my organization. They continue to pay my salary, they continue to take care of us, but there is a cost to this, and folks would like to donate, they can do so at newyorkfamilies.org/donate.
So look, everyone, this is a man who has spent his life doing the right thing, a man who not only does the right thing personally and for his family, but is doing the right thing for those around him, is supporting us, is supporting the population that believes in conservative values, is supporting Judeo-Christian values, is supporting life. This is a man who's dedicated his life to these things and has had to go through this. And now, Jason, you have another burden that you're bearing. And, I want our people to know about you and to, try to help you as they can or if they can. But you had surgery to remove a tumor in your colon. So tell us what happened there.
Yeah, so the day after Christmas, just this last year, I was diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer. January 20th, I went in to have surgery to remove a tumor. When I woke up from the surgery, I was informed that when they got in there, it was worse than they realized. It's not stage 3, it's stage 4 colon cancer. So we are now going through the process of looking to various forms of treatments and what we need to do to go ahead and defeat cancer in my life as well. So we've been through a number of challenges, a number of battles over the last number of years. I always tell people, God's been faithful to sustain us through it, but it has not been an easy path as we're now dealing with cancer. I've never really been in the hospital before. I've not on any meds or anything until the last few weeks. So this is another new experience, but I'm trusting the Lord will continue to protect us and guide us through even this one.
All right, Jason, look, we're coming to the end of this show. God bless you. God bless you for what you've been through.
God bless you, Jason. You're a good man.
You are a good person.
You're a man of God.
And we all pray for you.